A couple of months ago, I was coaching a mum on Zoom, and we'd only been working together for a couple of sessions. And halfway through the session, something heartbreaking happened. She burst into tears and she said, "I don't know why I'm so angry all the time. My kids are just being kids, I know that, but I snap and then I feel so ashamed, and I promised myself I would be different from my parents, but here I am repeating the same old stuff." It was huge. If you've ever felt that way, like your reactions are just bigger than the moment, or maybe like you're stuck in patterns that you don't fully understand, then you are not alone. That's why I am really, to be honest, so proud to be able to bring this conversation to you today on the podcast. We are diving into the beautiful, life-changing work of reparenting yourself, what it means, why it matters, and how to actually do it so that you can begin to respond with calm and compassion instead of reacting from old wounds. My guest today is the incredible Shelly Robinson. You will know her if you're one of her 500,000 followers on Instagram and Facebook. Her account is Raising Yourself. Shelly and I talked about why reparenting your inner child is the key to breaking generational patterns, the surprising truth about anger and actually what it's trying to teach us, and also the role of self-compassion in letting go of guilt. Also, we actually did a really powerful guided inner child reparenting exercise. You can do it right along with us. It was amazing. And there's a moment that I will not forget when Shelly shared this really powerful insight. Your parents have an inner child too. So the people who raised you have inner children. And what does that mean? And where do we go with that? This one thought, it really changes everything. I think sometimes we can feel, that we experienced difficult things, or there was some gaps or some unmet needs that we experienced as kids, and sometimes there was trauma there. And so it's just a really powerful perspective to have that, it's another way to look at and frame how the people who raised us, what was going on for them. A little bit more about Shelly. She is a certified conscious parenting coach, and she's the creator of the Connected Kid Toolkit, which is amazing. And she's already been featured in huge media organizations like Mind Valley, Go Zen, Raised Good, and so many others. Her work helps parents all over the world create homes that are filled with more connection and compassion and emotional safety. And I think this is, to be honest, one of the episodes that's going to spark a shift in how you see yourself and your parenting. Just before we dive in, I want to mention two things. I haven't really properly introduced myself in the last few episodes, so a little bit about me. I'm Stephanie Pinto, an award-winning emotional intelligence parenting coach, an international speaker, a best-selling author, and my huge mission is to help families raise emotionally intelligent, resilient, confident kids without relying on punishments and yelling and threats. And through this podcast and a bunch of resources and courses, I help parents just like you to break old cycles and create homes filled with calm and connection. The way I do it blends compassion with neuroscience, which I love, and also practical tools to really help you make a difference. And I first experienced the power of emotional intelligence in my own family. It really helped me to start staying calm and not shutting down and yet not blowing up, especially during those challenging moments with my kids, and really helped me to build stronger and more trusting, connected relationships with my kids and my husband, who's been on a couple of the episodes. If you've missed those, then go back and check those out. So now I'm very passionate about teaching parents how to bring this same stuff and this transformation into their lives, which is why I love it so much. And the second thing I wanted to mention, obviously, before we begin, I always want to acknowledge the Darug Nation because they are the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, work, and record this podcast. And I pay my respects to First Nations people, their elders, and their ancestors. And I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and I stand in solidarity towards a shared future. Okay, let's dive in. Okay, Shelly, it is such a pleasure to have you on. I'm so grateful for you giving us your time and sharing with us your wisdom, but your heart as well. I don't know about everyone else. I'm obviously going to, push people to go and follow you and all of your work. But man, every time I see you online and your videos, I just think, oh my God, we're so aligned, and she gets it. So thank you for all you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you. I appreciate all the work you do too. And it's so nice to have our voices amplified and to know that there's other parents out here doing this work and, breaking all these cycles.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot. Well, maybe we should start with because a lot of your vision for parents is that concept of reparenting ourselves so that then we can
Hmm.
show up to be the parents that we want to be, which is not easy.
Yeah.
Maybe let's start with why raising yourself, which is your Instagram and your work, why raising yourself,
Yeah.
and what is reparenting as well? Kind of just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So reparenting, if you're not familiar with that term, I just want to assure you that's okay because I remember 5 or 6 years ago, that was a new term to me. And honestly, I heard it and I thought it sounded a little too like out there and not applicable to me. And so I just want to assure any parents listening that if it's new to you, that's perfectly okay. But I learned when I discovered this term that the easiest way for me to describe it is coming alongside a younger version of yourself and giving that child version of yourself what you did not receive as a kid growing up. And so that could look like a lot of different things, right? So that's really unique to the person who's reparenting themselves. It could look like giving yourself as an adult the voice that you didn't have as a child, giving yourself the self trust that you did not receive as a child. So it's going to look a little bit different for every parent. However, whatever it is you're giving to yourself, it just makes it so much more likely that you will not pass that same thing on to your child, right? So this work comes full circle. It's very beautiful. It's very hard. And most of all, I think it's really courageous because, confronting that and saying, and this doesn't mean, I also want to clarify that this doesn't mean we're like blaming and shaming our parents and that we're throwing them under the bus because multiple things can be true, right? They could have done a great job in a lot of areas and then they could have missed some things. And so the reparenting ourselves is kind of going back in time and giving ourselves those things that they might have missed. And
So
doing whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, I cut you up, but it
No,
came to
it's
me
okay.
and I thought, so why might we need to reparent and how do we know if this is new to us? How do we know if we
Yeah,
think, oh, there are some things that were missed? Like what are some of the things that were missed? How do we know if we need to reparent or if we could reparent?
sure. Yeah, you know what? I'd love to answer that story if I could with a little story because I think stories can help to kind of like help people relate to their own situations, right? And I
Yeah.
think for me, it was my anger. And so I have this vivid memory of when I had this like turning point in my own parenting journey where I was like, maybe this isn't about my son who wasn't brushing his teeth or taking a shower, doing what he needed to do or what I wanted him to do. And maybe this is a little bit deeper and more about me. So, this is a very typical situation. This was like years ago when my son was little. He was 4 or 5. He's 14 now, which is
What?
crazy to think about. And he wouldn't do one of those things that you want your kid to do at nighttime, brush, get in the bath, whatever it was. And I was furious with him, like an unreasonable amount of rage toward this tiny little 4 year old who just was like, I don't want to brush my teeth, mom, like what 4 year old kid does, right? And the amount of rage I felt was so disproportionate. It scared me. I mean, I did, and I yelled at him at this volume and in this way that was horrifying. And I felt immediate, that shame and regret and guilt and all of those feelings that we feel as parents when we lose it like that.
Mhm.
And it was so scary to me that I had lost it like that, that I was like, I got to think on this. This wasn't just like, I'm annoyed and I lost my temper a little bit. It felt much, much deeper than that. And that's when I started exploring this possibility that like that came from a different place than just me being like an overwhelmed, tired mom. Like it was coming from somewhere deeper. And it was that he wasn't hearing me. He wasn't listening to me. And it activated this kind of like this rage and this helplessness that, caused me to just scream at him. And that was little me screaming at him. So if you can like imagine little you, and then you come face to face with your like 4 or 5, however old your kid is, right? This could be a teenager too. All of a sudden you're like in the ring with your kid and you're the same age as them. And it was really little me being like, listen to me. You're not hearing me. I feel helpless. and unheard, and that was kind of it for me. And so I share that story. I know that won't necessarily resonate with everyone listening, but I would invite parents listening to just maybe think of a time when there was something deeper there. And I think you'll know, it's there's not like this beautiful formula that I have laid out, but I think you'll just know if you're willing to spend time reflecting on that, where those wounds exist in your own childhood.
Oh, okay. So that story really landed with me because I remember a very similar moment, probably when my
Yeah.
youngest was maybe a bit younger. I feel like she was kind of
Okay.
toddler, maybe like 3, and I don't even
Hmm.
know what happened, but she also wasn't listening or wasn't doing what I was asking. And I got so
Yeah.
furious that I think I must have like sent her to her room and just
Hmm.
in the doorway, when she was walking in her room, I was like, in my head, I just remember thinking, you're not walking fast enough. Like, get in there. Like, I really just
Yeah.
needed that control. I was so angry. And I like pushed her in the back between the shoulder blades and
Yeah.
she like fell forward. And
Oh,
I was just overcome. And then in
yeah.
that immediate like guilt and shame and like, oh my God, who am I for doing
Right.
this?
Right. Yeah, I know. I can hear like that in your voice, and even like telling that story, like I get teary-eyed like a decade later, it's so those are the moments though that we can that's where the heal is. This sounds a little cliche, but that's kind of where the healing happens, right? When we're willing to like confront those moments where we're like, what was that? And instead of like justifying it and being like, yeah, that's right, kid, take that and, like perpetuating it, we say, whoa, I don't want to do that again. And then we do that inner work that it takes to ensure that we don't do that again, right? And that we tend to that little kid inside of us who kind of took the steering wheel in those moments.
Yeah. Do you think it's pretty common that parents will kind of justify I think like it's almost well intended, but it's this justification of
Yeah,
like, well, you weren't listening to me, so that's why I had to X, Y, Z. And it almost like, do you think it blocks us from actually going, actually, maybe that was on me that I should have handled it better?
yes, that's exactly, I believe that wholeheartedly. And I was asked in an interview a really long time ago, like what I thought the most important part of parenting was. And what you said just kind of hit that on the head. It's humility. It's that willingness to say, maybe I could work on myself a little bit here, right? And it's that willingness to like take full ownership for our own behavior and knowing that when we say, behavior is communication with kids. Behavior is also communication with us. I literally just said this to my son a couple nights ago because I lost my temper and it wasn't as bad as like 10 years ago, but I got mad at him about something and I was short with him. And I was like, I told him later, I said I was doing some reflection and my behavior was communication to myself that I need to do X, Y, and Z. So I didn't do that to you again. So anyway, that all to say, yes, like humility is really the only way like to healing. And I think it's been so ingrained in so many generations of parents that like parents right, the kid is wrong. There's this hierarchical dynamic where, there's no room for the parent to be inferior, like meaning
Yeah.
they apologize or they say, hey, I could have handled that better. And I love that the tide is turning and that as a generation of new parents, we're saying, I'm going to say I'm sorry to my kid and I'm going to take ownership for my own immaturity. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Wow.
blame myself for it. I'm just going to own it. And then I'm going to say I'm going to work on that.
That's massive. And I think it can be such a big hill to like overcome. And actually
Yeah.
something my husband said a while ago, it stuck with me. He's come a long way, like with his parenting, because he's very different
Yeah.
to me. But
Okay.
what was that quote? He kind of said, like, now I don't have that idea of like, this is the hill I'm gonna die on. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
be like digging my heels in and being like, but you have to listen. Now he's almost like, I guess you could call it softened a little bit, but it's almost like
Yeah.
just he's more flexible.
Okay.
Um, and we both are. But it's
Yeah.
yes, we've kind of learned to gradually step out of that. I'm up here, you're down there. What I
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
goes, and I'm the parent, so I have the authority. Like but that was how we were raised. So
Yeah.
in our blueprint.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I want to just like commend parents who are making these changes. And I want to also offer like a physiological, and now I'm not an expert in neuroscience, so I don't want to pretend to be. However, those things are wired into our brains, right? And so when you go to make those generational changes, it is hard. Your brain is like, no, I don't want to work hard, right? That makes like our brains are going to take the most efficient route when it comes to our behavior. So when we're bumping up against something that's been hardwired in not only our brains, but our parents' brains and their parents' brains, it is hard. So if you are trying to change those cycles and shift the tide for your kid and it's not easy or you're not getting it right the first few times, please, I beg of you to just forgive yourself, give yourself grace and know that like that makes sense. Of course it would be hard. That doesn't mean we give up, but it also just like not stewing too long and the fact that you didn't get it right the first couple times is okay. And I want to share that the first time I apologized to my son, he was 2, and it was like my ego was like, no. It was like if you can like picture this like, like wicked witch like, like bursting into flame. I felt like I wanted to throw up because I didn't want to do it. I was like, this feels like I shouldn't be doing it. I'm the parent, but then I knew I didn't want to like be the parent who never apologized. It was like this whole internal thing. And again, he's 2, so he has no idea. He's probably like, can I just have my Cheerios? Like, can you just like get on with this? But it was again, this was 12. Now this was 12 years ago. And I still vividly remember like, yes, I did it. And now I like apologize to them every week. They're like, yes, mom, we know you're so, I mean, like, I try not to do it too much, but like now it's just like, we're always all apologizing to each other in our house. And that's just like our culture. But the first time it sucked. And I was like, this is unpleasant. I don't like it.
Okay, I'm glad that you said it was really hard and it sucked and it was uncomfortable the first time
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
makes it's so relatable because,
Yeah.
I think it's impossible for us to go from like having this sense of like this blueprint, these sort of sets of rules and then go
Yeah.
to, okay, I'm going to throw that out the window and
Right. It's messy. It is so messy. And it does, your ego is constantly like, you sure you want to do that? Are you sure about that? So
yes.
you
And
really have to like be careful and just keep that in check, right?
yes. Okay, I'm glad you said that. It's a big challenge to our ego, which just
Yeah.
doesn't like being wrong or having to maybe change what it's been doing.
Yeah.
This kind of brings up this concept. I think we've kind of been talking a bit about it. I think you said not, what did you say? Not like staying on it for too long and feeling guilty and like getting bogged down in that. This idea of
Yeah.
self-compassion that you talk about,
Yeah.
and that is almost like the key. Would you say that's kind of the key to starting this reparenting?
I do. I really do because we are going to make mistakes, right? So if like a great analogy is like riding a bike and, when a kid gets on a bike doing something new for the first time and they fall off it, we're not yelling at them and calling them, we're just like, yeah, you fall off it a few times before you learn how to do it. And if we're learning a new parenting skill that was never modeled for us and we fall off that, bike, that metaphorical bike the first few times, like we're just going to forgive ourselves and say, of course I fell off the bike. Like, why wouldn't I fall? Who does anything brand new and doesn't fall off the bike a few times? So it's just
Oh,
like, what a relief. But I will tell you what I used to before I adopted that mindset. And I'm still not perfect at it, right? There's still times where I'm like, the inner critic kind of comes out. But before, I used to kind of think that if I could shame myself into becoming a better parent, right? So I would like at the end of the day, this was kind of at the beginning of my own reparenting and conscious parenting journey. I would kind of like lay in bed at night and catalog all the things I did that I was like so ashamed of and felt bad about, and just kind of like audit them and be like, you suck. Like that was so dumb of you. Why did you're totally screwing up your kids, and just kind of like talk to myself without even thinking. It was very unconscious and automatic, thinking like if I did that to myself, then I would change. And we all know how that ends, right? Like you never can shame yourself into like better behavior, just like we don't want to do that with our kids. So I had not yet made that connection. So it took me a really long time to realize I was doing that. And then once I did realize it, I stopped doing it and I replaced it with the things I was doing well. And not like in an egotistical, like you're so great, but just like, like quietly, silently, just like acknowledging where I did breathe through my anger and I did walk, away if I had to before I said anything unkind, and kind of like celebrating my wins. And I went to bed that way. And that was a game changer for me.
wow, that's really practical as well for parents to go, yeah, I
Yeah.
beat myself up, and yeah, at the end of the day, my head hits the pillow. I'm like, why'd you do that? You're scarring your kids. Good one. To
Right.
just make those little tweaks and go, hey, you took a breath there, or you that would have been an explosion, and it was like a little like puff, or I don't know,
Yeah.
like noticing the changes or the little
Yeah.
improvements. I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems, if you choose to do that, if you're listening to this and you say, I'm going to try that tonight, listen to how I would invite you to just like notice how you respond to that. Because even as something as simple as like, you're a good mom or you're a good dad, like, listen to your inner reaction to that. Because even today, even though I've done all this work, I still, if I say that to myself, like, you're doing a good job, I'm like, my inner critic is immediately like, are you though? Sure about that? So you still have, even that's not to say I don't receive that compliment sometimes, but still there are moments where I don't believe it. So it's just the constant practice.
Okay, so can I just say, you've been doing this for many years. This is for the benefit of
Yeah.
everyone listening, and me too.
Yeah.
You've been doing this
Yeah.
for many years. You have over 500,000 people in, followers, let's say, people watching your stuff, and you're
Yeah.
speaking about this and putting content out, and still you have those moments where you're like, maybe you could have done better. You're like, you
Yeah.
still have those moments of humanity. Like that's so, I think you said before, it's like a relief that we,
Yeah.
we don't have to be perfect. That's
Yeah.
not what we're aiming for. And it's a long term, is it like a long term journey that we just commit to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just think, I've only been doing this for like a decade. I spent 3 decades before that beating myself up all the time. So I'm still like, like I still have a long ways to go. And that's not I don't want to say that in like a discouraging way, like that this never ends. But I think it is to some degree human nature to just kind of, especially if you were raised in an environment where maybe criticism was pretty prevalent, like it's hard to unwire that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? Because our inner child deserves that healing, and our children deserve to not inherit that.
Yes.
So, it really does come full circle. And I also don't want to like, I don't know, I think I benefit the most from content and speakers and coaches who are just like, yeah, I mess up all the time. Like pretending to be a parent who just has it all together and like this is all rainbows and unicorns is never helpful for me. So I just want to be real with your audience and just let them know that we're like all screwing up and we're all forgiving ourselves and we're all trying again. And like hopefully that's, at the end of the day, our kids still feel so loved by us and so securely attached, and they see our humanity, because I would not want a perfect parent. I
Mm.
would feel so intimidated, and it would be hard to like be around someone who didn't mess up sometimes. So every time I make a mistake, I'm like, oh, well, at least they know like I'm a human being,
Yeah,
and
I
that they
love
can mess up too. Yeah.
oh, that is so good. That's so good. So is it something that's inevitable that if we start this journey and we become open to reparenting and what that might look like, are we going to have all these thoughts about our parents or our caregivers and what they didn't do and feel guilty? Like I love that you said, look, it doesn't mean that we are um, saying that our parents were awful and terrible.
Right.
They may have been some wonderful, great things that we were experienced or that were passed on, but there might have been some gaps and things missing. How do we? Is that something that people experience? Like really thinking, gosh, there was that time that this happened, or that I did feel criticized a lot. Like, how do we? I don't know what my question is.
Yeah.
How do we go through that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it's so personal, right? And I have a hard time answering this in like a very black and white, like, just forgive them and like move on. And because this exists on a spectrum, right? Everyone, like the abuse people experienced as children was, it could have been horrendous and unforgivable and traumatic, like deeply traumatic. And then there are other kids who it was pretty good, but there were there were some misses by the parents. And so, obviously it's up to the individual parent or person to decide whether or not to like forgive those things and how to reconcile that in their hearts.
Mm.
However, I'll just speak from my personal experience, and that the more I understood my own inner child, the more empathy I had for my own parents. I know that will not ring true for everyone, right? But once I understood that like my parents also had inner children that had been that they had their own childhoods where their voices were shut down and they were conditioned to believe things about themselves and the world around them and how they fit into it. It kind of was this light bulb moment where whether you decide to forgive your parents or not, it made the things that they missed so much less personal. I guess that would be my takeaway. It was like, oh, that wasn't about me. That was about their own wounds. And that just knowing that for myself felt like it lightened the load for me. And again, that's not me. That might not ring true for everyone, and that's okay because this is such like nuanced personal work. But I think just knowing that it wasn't like about you being a bad kid, like you didn't receive that treatment because you were bad, but rather because they had unhealed wounds. Like that makes my heart feel healed in so many ways, knowing that.
Wow, that is a light bulb moment. Like for me as well to think that when we acknowledge or when we realize that the people who raised us were also raised by, it sounds so silly, like it's logical, but
Right.
they were raised by
Yeah.
people who were also like a very different era, may have
Yeah.
will have gone through the wars and things like that. And
Sure.
however that experience was for them, like they are also carrying things that were given to them that they didn't
Yeah.
choose, and that they've
That's right.
we pass things on like that. No, yeah, it would help me. It's a light bulb moment to go, maybe I can take some of those things that I experienced less personally because a big
Right.
chunk of it was not about me at all.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you can both take it less personally, and that doesn't mean you have to forgive. Like again, that's a very like personal thing. But yeah, it's just interesting to think about like it not being about us and just to be kind of like ponder that and how does that change how you see yourself? There's all sorts of questions you can unpack just with that like statement alone, but it's interesting. And the other thing too that I thought about was like what changes did my parents make and lots of other parents make that were different from their parents? Like maybe that what they did wasn't as bad as what their parents did. Like I remember thinking when my son was really little, like I was like, I'm not gonna spank. That's a non-negotiable. But like at that time, I was like, but I'll do timeouts. And that to me was better. I don't do timeouts now. I have, you know what I don't want to say obviously, but like I have deconstructed from that years ago. And so, but if I would have stuck with timeouts, that still would have, I think, been an improvement from spanking. You
Yeah.
never know like what improvements they made because you don't know how they were raised. So it's just kind of interesting to think about,
Wow, it is
all those
so
different,
interesting to think about.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
we could just go down this spiral rabbit hole and go, oh my God, like I think we
right.
could talk
It's
for an
really
hour.
fascinating. And it's really fascinating too how stuff gets wired in our brains and epigenetics and all of those topics. And at the end of the day, though, I mean, we could, do a whole podcast on that, but like, as parents, we don't want to pass that hot potato of pain onto our kids. That's the bottom line, right? We're like, I don't want my kid to feel that way. And the only way the most effective way I think to accomplish that is to make sure inner, inner Shelly, little Shelly, heals too, so that I'm not passing that on to my kids. So,
I love that. Okay, maybe the last thing
yeah,
to wrap up
yeah.
is I have two questions, but I'm just going to pick one of them because of time, and it's
Okay.
around I think one of your most recent reels on
Oh,
Instagram
yeah.
was five ways I'm reparenting myself,
Uh-huh.
and one of them was getting to know my inner child. And
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, if people are ready and curious about how do I get to know my inner child, because I want to start there because I know there are some gaps there or some hurt and some wounds. What is either your advice or what is a scenario or some tips with like how do we start to get to
Yeah.
know little Steph, or like we might be talking 30 or 40 years ago kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I always recommend starting with, and I know a lot of sometimes people will say, I can't remember my childhood, and that's tricky. And that, again, we probably don't have time to get to that today. But if you are able to access memories of your childhood, I always invite people to reflect on their happiest memories. Like, what were you doing? How old were you? What were you wearing? Like, get a very vivid picture of that and kind of tap into that. And then start to think about when that version of yourself started to fade into the background. And it's really getting to know like what happened, what was happening in your life. Was there a specific incident? Were there lots of incidences? But kind of bridging that gap between who you were as your most authentic, happy self, and then why did she start fading into the background? And just thinking through that. And then whatever needs were not met during that time, kind of coming back as an adult and giving those to yourself, right? So if you used to be really like boisterous and outgoing and like talkative, and that was just too much for your parents or too much for your teachers, this is your opportunity as an adult to reclaim that and let your kids see that and like using your voice.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And simple, maybe not simple, but like things that we can do at home. We don't have to go and buy anything. We don't have to like be at a certain
Yeah.
place. We don't need a
Right.
therapist.
Yep.
It's something that we can do on our own, maybe with a bit of
Yeah.
support. Actually,
Right.
tell us, I wanted to ask you about your Connected Kid Toolkit. Can you tell
Oh,
us a bit about that
yeah.
before we jump off?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you for asking. That's a resource that I love. I created that a couple of years ago. It includes conversation cards for you and your kids. It includes lots and lots of activities because I love the idea of like sharing a conversation with your child, but then bring it to life with super fun, doable activities that you can do in your home. You don't have to go out and buy anything. And then one of my favorite parts of it, it's a 3-part toolkit, is the reparenting workbook. And so when you ask like how do you get started work, like getting to know your inner child, this is it's a 100-page digital workbook of prompts to work through and to invite yourself to like get to know little you. And it goes much deeper than what we've talked about today, but it's really an opportunity to kind of go back in time and heal those wounds. So again, we're not passing that pain on to the next generation.
Oh my gosh. So where
And
can
that's
people get these?
yeah, that's at kidtoolkit.com. And you can get all of that there. And I am so excited. Thank you for asking about that.
Oh, yes. I thought I better, because some people are going to go, oh my God, this is the puzzle piece that's been missing, exactly what she is talking about. So for those people, I say, welcome. I'm so glad you
Yeah.
found this episode and you found
Yes.
Shelly. If you're not already following her, go. and you can, get her resources because it is difficult. I think it's hard. You talk about we can't do this with just willpower alone. It's too
Right.
hard.
Right.
But you don't need all these different you know, resources and tools. And like if you have just a few, you've distilled this stuff down into the
Yeah.
workbook, or like this is the starting point. This is perfect.
Yeah. And really, I think the takeaway for me is like this an invitation to soften towards yourself, right? Like, what if we just were like a little softer towards ourselves? I think we would be softer towards our kid. It would just naturally just flow out onto the people that we love the most. But it always, always starts with us. And that's the essence of raising yourself, right? We're raising ourselves right along our kiddos.
Oh, Shelly, it has been such a joy to speak with you. I'm so grateful for your time and just everything that you have shared so wholeheartedly. I think you're just such a gift, and I want to say a
Thank
huge
you.
thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be on this show. Thank you, Stephanie.
Hey everyone, Steph here. That was amazing, huh? Okay, so if I can leave you with one thing. Reparenting yourself can shift the way that you respond, not just to your kids, but to yourself too. Remember those old patterns? They're not set in stone. With just a little bit of self-compassion and a willingness to grow, you can create the change that you have been looking for. I promise you. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure that you check out Shelly's free guide. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Less Yelling and More Compassion. And you can connect with her on shellyrobinson.com, or obviously you can find her on all the social media places. And as always, if you found today's episode helpful, I would love you to share it with a friend, maybe leave a review, or you can reach out to me on social media. I always love hearing from you. And because you've made it to the end of the episode, which not a lot of people do, I have 2 gifts for you. The first one is called 3 Steps from Chaos to Connection. This is my emotional intelligence parent guide. You can download it right now for free. So usually it is for sale for $20. I've put it on my website for $0. So you can go in to stephaniepinto.com/resources and you can get that for yourself now. The second gift is another parent guide, especially if you're a parent of an anxious or nervous or sensitive child. It's called Beating Anxiety in Kids, and it is my comprehensive 16-page parent guide all on how to support and accommodate and boost your child's resilience and help them to overcome anxiety. Both of those, usually $20, now for free, $0. Just go onto my website. I'll put the links in the show notes and under the YouTube video if you're watching. But yeah, just go to stephaniepinto.com/resources and you can get those, and please share them around with other parents that you know, maybe family or friends that you know they have a child that, is struggling and they might like to benefit from these resources. Please share. I don't mind at all. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you. Keep raising those emotionally intelligent kids, and please be kind to yourself, especially with regards to reparenting. This stuff is hard, it takes time, and the more support you can get to go on that journey, the better. Okay, have a great week.